So we know how to find the optimal quantity using critical ratio. Now we want to look at how to find the expected profitability. So remember, what we're doing here is we're maximizing the profit. We started with a profit function, and that's how we determined what the optimal quantity would be. And remember how we set this up. There's two cases. The first is where my demand is going to be less than my Q, the amount that I order. And the second is when demand exceeds what I ordered. And remember what each of the functions are. If my demand is less than my Q, my profit is going to be P, the price I can charge for each unit, times X, the demand that materializes, minus C, the cost per item that it costs for me to acquire the item, minus Q, my quantity. So it's really just the margin. If I have my demand is greater than what I have, it changes slightly in that I can only sell Q units. I can't sell the full X that's demanded, but I still get to subtract off a cost for each of the units that I ordered. So if we expand this out a little and look at the continuous case, this is simply the summation or the integral from 0 to infinity of that profit function. I can break it up into two, where this first term is the case where my demand is less than my quantity that I order, and the second is when the demand exceeds what I ordered for my quantity. Now I can clean this up a little bit and kind of combine the terms, and the critical thing that I'm doing here is this first term now is actually the sales for the expected demand, for all of the demand regardless of what my Q is. It's really what I did is I combined some terms from the previous equation. I still have the cost that it will incur for each of the units that I order, and then this is essentially capturing my expected units short. So what I end up with is this expected profit equation consisting of three terms. The first term is P times my expected demand regardless of what my Q is. Then I've got this term for my costs. It's C, the cost per unit, times the quantity that I ordered. In the third term, I have to subtract off the expected units that I'll be short, because for here in this first term, remember what I'm doing is I'm multiplying my price per unit times my total expected demand, irregardless of what my Q is. But I know I'm not going to sell all of those. I'm only going to be able to sell up to Q, so I've got to subtract off the expected numbers that I'm short. Now this gets a little more complicated when we introduce some other terms. In the previous lesson, we introduced this idea of a salvage value or a discount, where if I don't sell something within the normal period, I can't get P for it anymore, but I might get a lower price. Whether this is a discount or salvage, it doesn't matter, but it's a lower unit value. I can also think of adding in a penalty. In addition to not the lost profit, I might have loss of goodwill, let's say. If I stock out of these jerseys, maybe I figure that I lose, I don't know, $5 in goodwill. Whatever that is, you can add that in as well. And these same two equations, the profitability equation for when I have demand is less than what I ordered, and when demand exceeds what I ordered, it all falls out the same terms as in the previous, and it turns out to be this equation. But if I rearrange some of the terms, I like to clean it up a little bit because it makes it a little more intuitive sense. I end up with this equation at the bottom. And there's four terms here. Let me talk about them really quickly. This first term, right? I have P, the price that I can sell each unit for at the full price, and this expected value of X minus the expected unit short. That's the expected number of jerseys or units that I will sell given what my order quantity is. So it's the expected total demand, E sub X, right? The expected value of X minus that expected number that I will be short. Notice that the same term repeats itself here, and I'll get to that in a second. So this first term, P times the expected value of X minus the expected unit short, is essentially the revenue I'm getting from the units I sell at the full price. This term, the negative C times Q, should be very familiar. It's just the cost for each of the items that I order. And then this last term is simply that new B that we talked about. For the expected unit short that I'm going to be, I get dinged this B for that. That's that penalty for lost sales. But the term that I want to focus on is this term, the third term, right? And this is going to be G, that's salvage value. And what am I multiplying that by? Well, Q is the amount I ordered, and I'm subtracting off the amount I expect to sell. And so this is essentially the number of units that will be sold or sent through the salvage value. So this is the equation. Let's dive a little deeper now into this expected unit short function.